Hi, this short show is about how I'm going to supervise you, just drawing up some of my main concerns and some of the main questions that I hear from students. First, I'll talk a little bit about my supervision style. I usually answer emails very quickly, meaning, straight away. So if ever I have the chance, I will just reply to you immediately. This means that we can get on with our work so that you don't get a break, that you have to wait for a response for a week or something like that and cannot get on with it. So if you have a question on anything, just write me an email and I will try to quickly respond. This is also sometimes easier. For instance, if we have a research question, a short piece of text, then sometimes it's much easier to reply on the email rather than to talk on the phone or have a meeting. We do have meetings whenever that is needed, so we can discuss more complex matters. These meetings are more when there's something that we don't really have a clear solution for, and then we can discuss that. We can also use the telephone. You're welcome to call me, and then we can also discuss issues that you're not certain of. So basically, I'm very flexible with regard to how and when we talk, but the main issue is speed. This is basically about the supervision style. When we do a thesis, we have to choose the method. You can choose qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method. Most students tend to use qualitative research method because simply it's easier to gain access to qualitative data, getting, for instance, 6 to 10 interviews. It's much more difficult to getting maybe 120 observations in a quantitative data set. That said, there's some students that do very good thesis based on quantitative data set. Those that make quantitative thesis, they either have a very good idea of how to collect the data. This can be done over the social media, LinkedIn or Facebook, or it can be done through students. It can be more difficult to get a deal with a company of sending a lot of surveys to them. So that's often very difficult. Qualitative research is more easy to get access to because it's not that many interviews. Mixed method is also a good idea, but then you have to have access to the quantitative research. There are also some students that already have some quantitative material, maybe from a company they work in. This can be done. Of course, there is some limitations because questions may not be asked in a scientific way. So there could be some limitations. Maybe the product is not as good as you would expect, but sometimes it works very well. Other times it works less well. But of course, if you have this kind of data set, it could be a good idea to consider to use it. Epistemology. This is something we should have in the thesis. On the other hand, it should not really take up too much space. What we don't want is to have a lot of citation of books with general material. So if you want to present something on the scientific angle of your thesis, and you should have something, you should not just make general statements. Make it very close to your own material. Make examples of it in relation to your own material, so it's very clear that it's not just something you could use in another thesis. It should be very clear that this is yours. The other thing is, what type of epistemology should you choose? And there are, of course, several different angles. And one could be social constructivism, another could be positivism, neo-positivism, or critical realism. A lot of students that I see they say they're social constructivists. This is simply not really true for most of them. So in the business and social sciences, most students, they would write in an epistemology that is functionalist or critical realist, neo-positivist, something like that. But very rarely it's social constructivism. If you are social constructivism, the sort of construction, the interpretation, the subjective perspective of issue is a main point of your analysis. So if you do not have subjective or interpretive aspect as a main point of your analysis, then you're probably not a social constructivist. You can also say, if your studies could also have been done by a survey, if you're interested in how variables are related to each other, like does satisfaction link to turnover, then it's most likely that you're not a social constructivist. Critical realism, that is a very broad category that places itself in the middle of the field between positivism and social constructivism, and basically it covers the most. You cannot really be wrong if you say you're a critical realist. So this is what you can do in that section, but you don't have to overdo it. It's not something that has to be taking up that much space. So research questions. What kind of research questions can you ask? And this is for the qualitative research question. For quantitative research questions, these are often much more easy for students to assess. So here I'm only going to go through qualitative research question. For qualitative research question, we can ask what and how questions. We want to have questions that sort of makes the foundation of exploration, something that we cannot really say using a survey. So we can have these questions that explore something but does not necessarily determine something. What we cannot ask in a qualitative research question is the degree or the extent or the percentage of something, because simply doing interviews will not answer these questions. So for qualitative research question, we should ask what is the relation between identification with the team and individual performance, for instance, and then we can describe that. We should also try to avoid which questions, if those which questions are linked to a long list of issues. For instance, which problem does a virtual team experience? This question could lead to numerous or endless factors, which we don't want, because then we cannot fully answer the research question. Research questions should be very narrow. That would be the best, since then you don't have to cover so much literature. It will be much more difficult for the censor to sort of poke a hole in your rationing. It's more difficult to say, well, you didn't cover that or you didn't cover this aspect, because you have a very narrow research question and you can keep all within that research question. A research question also should not be related to a specific company. It should be relevant to all companies that are in that situation. So it could be, stated that how is performance related to turnover in a company that is in a crisis situation, rather than saying mentioning a specific company. Also, research questions should not be too practical. They should be theoretically oriented, so they speak into some kind of theoretical debate, and then your case illustrate this point. Access to data is not easy. It's something that can be difficult for everybody. So you should be happy if you find a good company that will work with you. If they respond, and if you get a chance, you should be quick to respond back to them. You should be quick to move whenever you have the chance. If you find yourself having very great difficulty, you have to be creative. Simply to try to use all your network, maybe use an untraditional sample like a student, like university, like a club, or something that you can, where you can find some data that resembles what you're interested in. So you shouldn't just give up just if you cannot find exactly the company that you would want to work for. Just try and be a little bit creative. Now to some more factual issues. So how do we cite in the text? Well, if you have a short citation, a quote from an interview, or a theoretical citation, and if it's below 2 lines, it should be in the text, it should be in italics, and it should be marked clearly. If it's longer than 2 lines, you should have moved it in, and then you don't need to have it in italics. Another thing is references. How do we reference? Well, mostly we use the Harvard style as opposed to the Oxford style that uses footnotes or endnotes. In the Harvard style, we use author name and year. This is what you have seen most of your times during the studies. If we use somebody from some other source, we have to say that. So we say, this argument was by Johansen in Svendsen. So in that way, we make it clear that we didn't read the actual source, but we got the interpretation from Johansen. This was all.